Thanks so much for joining us for this Sunday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting this Sunday show on the 10th day of October now, 2021. Up first, let's see what's up. We've got, I believe, an advisory out. On the hazardous weather graphic, a wind advisory out for the eastern Alaska Range west of the Toe Cutoff for midnight tonight until noon on Monday. And that's for southeast winds gusting to 55 miles an hour through the passes. That's in gusts of 55 miles an hour. Sustained winds will be 25 to 35 miles an hour. And again, the gust 55 through noon on Monday. And from there, looking at the rest, that's the only watch, warning, and advisory out public-wise for the state. Satellite imagery showing next system moved on to the southwest coast. Picture time there, the front real close to the coastline, not particularly strong, but bringing some rain and some gusty winds with it, and much lighter precipitation amounts pushing inland there. Otherwise, we've got winds anywhere from 40 to 45 miles an hour in gusts along the southwest coast. Cape Newinam having a peak wind gust of 45 miles an hour with about a third of an inch of precipitation, that falling in the last 12 hours. And Hooper Bay gusts 41 miles an hour with, Toksook Bay picking up 0.12 of an inch of precipitation. So rainfall really not all that impressive with that system there on the coast, even lighter amounts inland. And I've got moisture streaming across Kodiak Island, some rain starting to show up on the southwest part of the island there. And cirrus spilling into southern Cook Inlet, moving northward during the afternoon. But sunshine, northern Cook Inlet and the Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound, across much of southern Alaska up to the lower Yukon River Valley there with some clearing skies, and temperature pushed up 52 degrees with light north winds, 10 to 15 miles an hour at Seward today. Very nice day there, Resurrection Bay. And really over the Kenai Peninsula, much of south central Alaska with a thickening cirrus down over southern Cook Inlet and Kachemak and Kamishak Bays. With warm spot in the state, though, was 54 degrees at Port Alexander with diminishing showers over the southeast coast today. For example, Juneau's only had 0.05 of an inch of shower activity. Petersburg about 0.07 of an inch. Again, those 12-hour amounts, and really tapering off this afternoon. Not much of anything reported down to the south there with the shower shifting down into Dixon Entrance. A lot of cloud cover up to the north with some areas of light rain at the lower elevations. Fairbanks had light rain this afternoon. They had about 0.03 of an inch of precipitation. And over at Galena, a little bit more, 0.07 of an inch. Again, reporting light rain there. But up to the north, temperatures definitely colder. Afternoon reading of 19 degrees at Dead Horse with 21 degrees down at Tuvik Pass. Arctic Village did pick up about 0.5 inch of snow in the last 12 hours there. Otherwise, lighter snow and more scattered light flurry snow shower conditions. Brooks Range on out to the Arctic coast there. And a little more in the way of clouds along the northwest coast today as winds diminish. But the far western Arctic coast point lay down to just about to Cape Lisburne did see some clearing. Next low center there near the Pribilof Islands, and winds gusted anywhere to 40 to 45 miles an hour eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula, not quite as strong as what was seen yesterday with that system. And it'll weaken and move eastward here tonight and into tomorrow, and actually weaken over the southwest interior. The low center will, and the front will really weaken, and just light rainfall amounts expected with that as it moves in. Way out there to the west, you can see the cirrus shield with the much bigger, stronger system will be driving eastward with a good west-southwest jet into the western Aleutians this evening, reaching the central Bering Sea and Aleutians after midnight and toward tomorrow morning. Panhandle will continue to dry out, and actually be a dry night, and at least part of tomorrow to begin with, before that system, another developing system along the frontal boundary there will produce quite a storm and bring gale force winds into the coast tomorrow afternoon. On the chart today, you can see the trough pretty much moved through now with showers diminishing in just about all areas of the Panhandle currently. Clearing, higher pressure, weak high pressure moving through, brought the sunshine to south central Alaska, southern Alaska, and up to the lower Yukon River Valley areas. And some scattered, mostly rain showers, light, as I mentioned, lower elevations, mixture or snow at the higher elevations, but again, amounts quite light. Flurries along the Arctic coast, locally into the eastern Brooks Range area, and that low center bringing rain into the southwest coast and breezy conditions with higher pressure. Not too bad of a day for the central and western Aleutians. That's ahead of the next system, as we'll see tonight. Makes its appearance there on the west side or the left side of the graphic, or the western areas there, driving that front gale force winds into the western Aleutians with rain spreading, but not quite making it to AKwx by midnight or by tomorrow morning. But it moved quite rapidly. It just may well by tomorrow morning reach AKwx as the next ridge moves pretty rapidly to the east. That low center moves to the southwest coast and starts to weaken. Should be pretty good rainfall amounts and locally windy conditions, 30 gusts, maybe 45 miles an hour at most, especially on the northwest winds on the back side of that across the Pribilof Islands there. But not too bad over the Togiak Bay, Dillingham, and into King Salmon area. Rain, Kodiak Island, rain increasing. First the clouds in the rain, of course. Cook Inlet, south central Alaska, North Gulf Coast. A dry night for the Panhandle and pretty dry over the interior areas. Copper River Basin on up across Tanana Valley and much of northern Alaska. Just a risk of a snow shower in the western Arctic coast, maybe. Probably be dry though. And for tomorrow, that same pattern pretty much holds, with maybe some flurries on the central Arctic coast, but staying dry over much of the interior. That weakening low over the lower Yukon River Valley, Yukon Delta area. Just west of the Kuskokwim Mountains. They'll kick off some rain or snow showers, depending on elevation, time of the day there, but amounts will be light. Gale force winds and rain, heavy at times, push into the Panhandle coastline as well as the North Gulf Coast. Looking at 45 knot winds now, not quite the storm force winds we had in the forecast yesterday. Look for diminishing rain and wind for Kodiak Island during the day tomorrow, but tighter gradient there over the Alaska Peninsula will kick the winds up, possibly as high as maybe 50 miles an hour, places like King Cove, normally windier areas for the northwest winds. Light wind, sunshine, Pribilofs, eastern Aleutians before the rain moves into Nikolsky late in the day. Rain and wind for the Aleutians and gale force winds. And that whole system drives eastward with strong west-southwest jet there. Kind of a couple of low centers now, one hanging back near the Pribilofs, the next one pushing in toward Cape Newenham. Rain comes back into Kodiak Island, but not so much wind. And the trough keeps it unsettled over the west coast areas up to the Arctic coast north slope. Another front develops with that 981 millibar low just south of Yakutat for another round of possibly heavy rain and wind, mostly on the northern Panhandle along the north coast. Lows tonight, mid-20s Copper River Basin, otherwise 30s to lower 40s, warmest near Kodiak Island elsewhere, mid-30s to lower 40s for the Panhandle. Highs tomorrow in the 40s to near 50, Homer and Kodiak, one of the warmer locations, upper 40s for the Panhandle, lower 40s Kuskokwim Valley. Mid-20s again, Copper River Basin on Tuesday morning, and Susitna Valley, Matanuska Valley, maybe in the lower 30s as well as Kenai Peninsula, but near 40 for Kodiak, in the 40s for the Panhandle, lower to mid, near 30 Bristol Bay. Highs Tuesday afternoon, near 40. We're into the upper 40s, south central Alaska, near 40 Copper River Basin, 45 to 50 for the southeast coast Kodiak Island. Lows, teens and lower 20s, north slope in the Arctic coast, and upper 20s, lower 30s for the central interior. Highs 20s for the Arctic coast, near 40 for the Fairbanks area, followed by lows, again, single numbers now, a little cooler there. Arctic Village in Anatuvik, and in the 20s over the Tanana Valley.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Our first graphic Monday morning, some IFR there along and south of the central eastern Brooks Range, or from the Koyukuk Valley east-northeast toward the border. Marginal VFR North Slope Arctic coast down to just south of the Yukon River to the White Mountains. Tanana Valley though, VFR. Marginal VFR Western Copper River Basin, and IFR for the Western Alaska Range southward. Southern Cook Inlet, Kodiak Island, Iliamna Lake, and the Aleutian Range. Southwest Coast IFR up into Norton Sound and most of the eastern Bering Sea. Marginal VFR Central Bering, next system spreading IFR into the southwest Bering eastward to Amchitka Island. IFR North Gulf Coast, marginal VFR Central Panhandle, IFR down south. And for the afternoon, IFR along the southeast coast, inside waters, marginal. North Gulf Coast IFR, Prince William Sound, eastern and southern Kenai Peninsula, southern Cook Inlet, Kamishak, Kachemak Bays, and western Cook Inlet, some IFR up to the eastern slopes of the Alaska Range. And then for the southwest interior, IFR on up into the greater Nome area, Nunivak Island, part of the Alaska Peninsula, and then a pretty good zone of IFR, that next potent system spreading in toward the central Bering Sea, central Aleutian areas. Otherwise, VFR, most of the eastern and northern interior, some lingering marginal VFR there for the Arctic coast and North Slope. And for the morning on Tuesday, marginal VFR, North Slope Arctic coast, south of the mountains, VFR, except for the western interior, we've got marginal VFR right up to the Alaska Range and extending back up toward the Selawik Valley, Kobuk Valley, northwest coast, IFR, Nome, and Teller, as well as Shishmaref, Tin City, southeastward there into the Kuskokwim Mountains, IFR Pribilof, central Bering Sea, and along the frontal boundary there into the Alaska Peninsula, trailing back to Atka Island. A little bit of IFR for the eastern North Gulf Coast, southern Panhandle IFR, otherwise marginal. Kodiak Island, northward, Kenai Peninsula, south central Alaska, VFR, right on up into the interior, good VFR. And then for the afternoon, IFR showing up there over the eastern interior, slips on up, I guess, from the south. But a big zone of VFR, northern Alaska, marginal for the Arctic coast. IFR, Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Bay, Nunivak Island, down to the Alaska Peninsula, southern Kodiak Island, IFR, North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, southern half of the Panhandle. And for passes, Anatuvik and Adigan, both improving throughout the day. Slowest conditions in the morning, best conditions in the afternoon. Probably be VFR. And Lake Clark and Merrill, lowest flying conditions will be on the eastern approach of both passes. It'll likely be IFR, but marginal VFR on the west side. Same pattern for Rainy. Less of a chance of seeing any IFR there, but probably definitely see some marginal VFR. Windy though, VFR. Isabel, VFR. And Mentasta also staying VFR tomorrow. And Tanita starting out VFR, trending toward marginal VFR, especially on the eastern entrance throughout the afternoon toward evening. Portage, IFR eastern approach, better conditions on the western entrance. And for Chilkoot and White, looks pretty marginal. Freezing levels, 2,000 feet there, coming down, kind of poking up into the Chukchi Sea, some warmer air there, 2,000 feet over southwest Alaska along the North Gulf Coast into the Panhandle, 4,000 feet just very close to Kodiak Island. And taking a look at icing, system spreading icing into the southeast coast, North Gulf Coast. The heaviest area still off to the west and south of those areas, staying in the Gulf of Alaska. And some of that spreads up into the Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet, northern Kodiak Island. Next system spreading widespread area of isolated moderate icing with considerable moderate icing along in advance of the frontal boundary in toward Adak. And that'll shift toward Atka late in the day, and that whole mess spreading in toward the eastern Aleutians early in the evening on Monday and late evening for the Pribilofs. And for the jet stream, that getting pushed eastward, but for tomorrow, looking at southern Bering Sea, west, northwest, 150 knots cutting across the Alaska Peninsula, and then 105 knot southwesterlies, drop off considerably under a ridge axis there over the Panhandle, lighter winds up over the northern western interior, and at 9,000 feet west, strongest jet just south of the western Aleutians, 45 to 60 knot winds there with that next system pushing into the Gulf toward the southeast coast. And 3,000, about the same pattern. Turbulence, moderate chop, Panhandle, North Gulf Coast, all of the Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, and today I'm privileged to introduce Dr. Uccellini, the Director of the United States National Weather Service. Welcome back to Alaska, sir.
Thank you, Dave. Glad to be here.
Thanks. Prior to being the leader of the National Weather Service, your work included an extensive look at snowstorms across the northeastern United States. These are the types of storms that can bring some of the country's largest cities to its knees. Tell me a little bit about your fascination with snow.
Well, as far back as I can remember, I've always been interested in weather, growing up as a kid on Long Island, New York, and was particularly fascinated by snowstorms. why they occurred. The distribution of snow was very varied across the entire region. The rain-snow line, all those things fascinated me right from the get-go. And I was interested in knowing how they worked, how the forecast worked, or more often than not, didn't work one way or the other. And that drove me, that interest continued to build and drove me through high school right into college, wanting to be a meteorologist.
Oh, okay, that's a fascinating story, and I think every meteorologist has a weather story like that in some way.
Right.
Due to Alaska's size and proximity to the North Pole, sometimes it's difficult to detect and analyze the weather patterns over Alaska. What's the National Weather Service doing to improve that weather detection?
Well, observations in this type of environment is a big challenge, whether it's from space or from what we call in situ observations from the ground or within the systems. Clearly, satellites have been playing an increasing role in providing the big picture, not only from a visual sense in what you see is occurring, but also from providing the data for numerical models that then are used to actually predict the weather. Alaska is actually pretty well positioned with respect to polar orbiting satellites, since you get a faster return of those satellites over your particular area. And in fact, the polar satellite system is the backbone for the observations that we use in our models, especially our global models, and they're particularly important for observing weather features that affect Alaska.
Alaskans live and die by the weather every day, and one of the strategic goals of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the National Weather Service is to develop a more weather-ready nation. What does it mean for Alaskans to be weather-ready?
Well, the strategic outcome is based on people being ready, responsive, and therefore resilient to the increasing threats to extreme weather events. Those threats are related to not only the nature of the events, but the fact that we're becoming more vulnerable to them as we have more people, more infrastructure that could be affected by these events. So we have to ensure that the observations we make for situational awareness, the forecasts we make for people to take the proper responses, are connected to people's actions, the response to these events, so that they will be more resilient to what's facing them. You know, there are examples with respect to hurricanes. More people living along the coastline takes longer to evacuate. We have to make better forecasts with longer lead times, but we also have to communicate the threat so people will actually take action to avoid those storms. Up here you have, as in other parts of the United States, an increasing threat related to fire. As there are more people living in fire-prone areas, we have to ensure that our forecasts are good, that we don't have false alarms that make people not react to the forecast when in fact they should. But we also have to be able to communicate the threat and make sure that we're working with the partners in the emergency management community so that communities and right down to individuals will actually take the proper responses in the face of these events. So that's the strategic goal. There are a lot of challenges for us in terms of improving forecasts, but also improving our communication skills and linking with the emergency management communities that are actually out there trying to protect lives and mitigate property loss.
So a huge partnership effort going forward.
That's one of the important keys for the success of meeting the strategic goal.
Okay. One of the things you're talking about was understanding the weather information we're getting back from the computers, weather modeling, and you did a lot of work with that in some of your prior positions with the Environmental Prediction Center there, the National Center for Environmental Prediction. What can you tell us about recent improvements in that weather modeling? And you were using the polar orbiters as kind of a source of information that started that process.
Well, you know, first of all, we have to recognize that everything you see, you read and hear about weather, climate, or ocean forecasts are all driven by numerical models. Now, it really has been the revolution in our forecast process in the last part of the 20th century. The success of that numerical enterprise is based on three factors: big computers, global data, not just local data, but you have to have a global data set. And then the models themselves, the science that's behind the models and in running the models in an operational mode. So we're working to improve all three of those components. We upgraded our computers last year. We're going through another upgrade even as I speak. We'll be upgrading from 200 trillion calculations per second to 700 trillion calculations per second by January of 2015. This increase in the computer will allow us to run what we call Earth system models. It's not just the atmosphere, it's the atmosphere, ocean, ice, which is obviously very important up here, and land models that are all coupled together at higher resolution. So you need the big computers, you need the science that allows us to run these models and run them in a parallel mode, and that they're coupled so that the ocean effects could affect the atmosphere and vice versa, as an example. And then the global observations are absolutely critical, and over the last 20, 30 years they've become more dependent upon the satellite systems, and especially the polar orbiting satellites, which help drive the observations needed for those models, whether they be atmospheric observations, land, ice observations. We're deriving more and more of that from satellites now that feed into these models and produce forecasts with extended lead times. Now out, for extreme events especially, we're seeing much improved forecast out in the 4, 5, 6, 7, and even 8-day range, which gets us back to Weather Ready Nation, because if you're going to get ready for a storm event, you want those consistent forecasts approaching that event from day 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, so you can take the actions several days in advance that can help mitigate the property loss and protect your livelihood.
Okay, all part of the mission of protecting life and property. Dr. Uccellini, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and speaking to Alaskans and sharing how the National Weather Service is working for Alaska and the nation. Wish you safe travels around the 49th. Enjoy your time here, sir. And for Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Look for gale force winds along the coast of the Panhandle and the eastern North Gulf Coast, just under storm force area. East-southeast winds 45 knots, eastern North Gulf Coast. North coast of the Panhandle, southeast 45 knots, seas around 15 feet. And 35 to 40 knots southerlies for the south coast, with seas of about 12 feet. Inside waters, much lighter winds. Clarence Strait, southeast 15, but small craft advisories for Stevens Passage, southeast 25 there, and then back down to 15 knots for Lincoln Canal and Glacier Bay. Moving on to the outlook for the day on Tuesday. We'll see winds come down, swing around to the south and southwest. Pretty brisk on the north coast there, but under gale force, looking at 30 knots from the south-southwest, seas 20 to 24 feet. And pretty high seas and small craft advisory level winds for the south coast, from the southwest at 25 knots. Inside waters, Clarence Strait, Stevens Passage, southeast winds 30 knots on Tuesday, and south 25 for Lincoln Canal. Prince William Sound tomorrow, east winds 30 knots, seas 7 feet, 45 knot easterly winds there for the eastern North Gulf Coast with 12-foot seas, and minimum gales on the western North Gulf Coast, east 35 knots, 10-foot seas, northwest 30 knots for the Barren Islands, but southeast 30 for Kamishak Bay, northeast 30 for southern Cook Inlet, northeast 25 north of the Forelands. And for the day Tuesday, much lighter winds, northern Cook Inlet coming down to 10 knots from the west, barely a breeze there, 2-foot seas, but small craft advisories continue south of the Forelands. West winds 25 knots, Kamishak Bay west at 30 knots, 8-foot seas. Gale warnings for the Barren Islands, west at 35, west-northwesterlies for the North Gulf Coast and Prince William Sound, all at 30 knots. In the Sound there, seas will be about 4 feet, but 13 to 15-foot seas for the North Gulf Coast. And for Bristol Bay, west winds 30 knots for the day on Monday with seas at 13 feet. Good gales out of the west, 40 knots across the Alaska Peninsula with Bering Seaside seas at 21 feet, 15 feet for the Pacific side, and those 40-knot westerlies extend all the way up to Sitkinak. And then east side of Kodiak Island, small craft advisories, west winds 30 knots, 10-foot seas, Shelikof Strait, only 20-knot winds out of the west. Outlook for Tuesday, small craft advisories of Shelikof Strait and Bristol Bay, both looking at a southwest wind is sustained at 25 knots. Gale warnings, east side of Kodiak Island, southwest 35 knots. And southwest 30 knots at Gannett to Castle Cape to Cape Sarachev. Gale warnings for west winds at 35 knots with 20-foot seas. West 30-knot winds with 17-foot seas for the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula. Western Aleutians, southwest winds 45 knots, high-end gales there, seas at around 20 feet, give or take, and southwest 40 knots for Adak and Atka, 10 to 14-foot seas. Unmak Island, westerlies at 30 knots, gale warnings for Unalaska Island, west 35 to 40 knots, seas as high as 20 feet. And for the day on Tuesday, west winds 40 knots, Adak and Atka, Unmak Island, Unalaska Island, seas running anywhere from 18 to 22 feet. Amchitka Island, same forecast, west winds 40 knots, 35-knot winds from the west from Kiska to Shemya. And for Monday, for the southwest coast, southern Nunivak Island, northwest winds 30 knots, gale warnings for the Pribilofs, northwest 35 knots, 14-foot seas, northwest 30 knots, St. Matthew Island, north 30 knots for the Yukon Delta coast, St. Lawrence Island looking at north winds at 25 knots, Norton Sound, northeast at 20. And then the day on Tuesday, east at 10 for Norton Sound, north 15 St. Lawrence Island, northeast at 20 for the Yukon Delta coast, small craft advisories for the Kuskokwim Delta coastline, southeast 25 knots, 10-foot seas, west winds 30 knots for the Pribilofs, and seas at 14 feet, St. Matthew Island, north winds 30 knots with 12-foot seas. Central and eastern Arctic coast, east winds 15 knots, west side, east 20 knots, 5-foot seas, and then east winds 15 knots from Cape Beaufort to Wales. And for the day Tuesday, winds pick up, small craft advisories from Cape Thompson all the way up, all the way to demarcation point there. Out of the east, 25 knots, 6 to 7-foot seas, 15-knot winds from Wales to Cape Thompson. And for tonight, storm moves on to the southwest coast, low center anyway. Front weakens, but brings rain into the Kuskokwim Valley and eventually Cook Inlet, Kodiak Island, North Gulf Coast. A lot of moisture. That next system developing brings gale force winds, rain heavy at times for the Panhandle and the North Gulf Coast. Next system pushing into the Aleutians, actually reaching the central Bering Sea tomorrow afternoon. Drives eastward with a strong west-southwest jet, driving rain into Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, and other front forms, and brings another round of wind and rain, mainly to the northern Panhandle. Not too bad over interior Alaska, with some scattered rain and snow showers both to the east and west and Arctic coast.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.